Oh, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our regular Thursday stream. This is going to be a very glowy one.
Hmm.
I am joined
Really?
by our usual co-host. Trig is here. He couldn't miss this one because we'll be bringing back some of the classic memes. Say hello, Trig.
Hello, Trick.
I
Uh,
knew that was coming.
you can't ask me to
I
pass
know, I
up a
know.
classic joke. Um, no, good to be back. Yes, this wouldn't. They're at it again. Basically, it looks like, isn't it? But we will get there.
They can't keep getting away with it. Well, it's not purely going to be about that. As is tradition, we also have our the second host of Starman and the Zoomer, as as people have put in the chat. Evelyn is here to get us deep into the weeds.
As per usual.
Our resident weed pursuer. Um,
Hey, simmer down.
that was completely unintentional. um,
Aha. Sure.
Before we start, I will do the normal YouTubey things. We are still monetized somehow. So the link is in the description if you want to make a Streamlabs donation. That is the best way to support us. We are
Yep,
still monetized
Susan.
by yes. We are monetized via YouTube still, so you can become a member if you want to support us monthly, or you can send a super chat. But do be aware that both of those have a 30% cut that's taken by YouTube. The fundraiser for Evelyn is now finished. It has raised the money and then some. To be fair, you raised it exactly through the online fundraiser, and there were people who gave around about £60 through the PayPal, and also there's about £20 that came through the YouTube channel. And this month's, well, I guess last month's now, but the month of May's ad revenue will go towards Evelyn at the Mises Institute. So
Awesome.
thank
Yes.
you guys for that. We've raised
Thank
a very decent amount of money in a relatively short amount of time. So
yes, I was gonna say that thank everyone very much who contributed to or shared or, you know, mentioned it or whatever else to folk and got the word out for it. Because I wasn't expecting it to all come together that sort of quickly, and I have sort of my flights and stuff now. Sadly, some other barriers in the way, but we'll see what happens to those. I don't know. All in
well,
good
we might be
time.
able to work around them. Yes. Trig, is there any updates you have? Anything you want to shill before we get into this? Because we got quite a lot to cover.
No, I don't know if you were out. I was on with Proper Horror Show earlier in the week talking
I
about
saw that
horror
one
movies.
actually. Yes.
And hopefully coming back to do some more in the future on there. It seems I'm becoming a perennial co-host and guest on various shows, which is good.
Oh
Good
no,
fun. Uh,
you're becoming me like 3 years ago.
don't even start. um, yeah, I bet. That and I don't know. I might be running more D&D games in the very near future as well. Which could be kind of fun. Quite enjoying doing that. But that is me. I'm trying to fill my life with fun stuff at the moment because too much politics makes Trig get grumpy at the
Which
moment.
makes Trigger grumpy boy, a very grumpy boy. We will, as always. I don't know if you've got it up there, Evelyn. Be using our trusty federal incandescence scale.
Oh, I
Uh,
can
it's
can
it is
grab that.
constructed. It has been constructed for just these occasions. We've had this image for around about a year now, I think.
Oh god, at
Maybe.
least this was
Yeah,
this
yeah,
Are
was
yeah.
you? Where did
pre
you
that was
post this?
pre-democratization.
Ah, yes, it was. It is in the stream resources. Yes, it is a primo classic piece of the Starman and the Vuma lore. Um,
Yeah.
Mostly because the original version of it had horrendous misspellings, which if you've been following me for any length of time, you know that is tradition. My horrendous meme misspellings, and I actually go around and flatten all my layers as well, like an idiot, so I can't correct them easily. Well, that's there we go. the ye olde federal incandescent scale. So
The
we'll be rating
the regretful Frommer asset.
this is the one with the spelling mistakes. Yes, this is the one with the spelling mistakes. I thought I would include it for flavor. But yeah, we do have the federal
Statistics
incandescent.
autiste.
Yes, he is an autiste.
Oui,
A
oui.
fine autiste.
Oui,
Oui, is the autiste.
Right, where shall we start then in this bright and intriguing journey? All 3 miles of it to your local convenience store.
I think we should start at the beginning. I think the links you've got here are actually in quite a good order, because there's a few of them we'll elucidate on later. But let's just chew through the different angles of this. If you don't know, someone enacted or reenacted Christchurch 2 convenience store boogaloo in a perfectly peaceful black neighborhood, let's say. Everything okay over there?
Yep, no, I just accidentally clicked the thing. We're good now.
Oh, good. Don't click the thing. The thing should not be clicked.
Okay.
But yes, we have here, I believe this is the Washington Post.
No, sorry, this is the USA Today one I've got up first. Which is just like a really like simple, like a kind of heartstrings kind of thing of like, it was such a peaceful place, and this person just arrived out of nowhere and for no reason whatsoever did these things, and it was just so evil. And this was such a nice community, but it was also a very impoverished community, because of course it is. You talk about Jefferson Avenue runs north and south through Buffalo's east side, where 78% of the residents are people of colour. And I don't know, as we will see when we get into some later statistics, not that that's
Jamie, pull up those crime statistics.
Yeah, not that that's our favourite place to go to, but just this whole thing they're trying to do of being like, it was a record shop here once nurtured the musical interests of a young Rick James. It's a throbbing centre of the black cultural community, and totally not like a crime-laden shithole.
Yeah, it's not the ghetto. It wasn't chosen because it is the ghetto. It's a beautiful creature. It's a beautiful place full of beautiful creatures.
So would you
very much not a ghetto.
Next, the opinion article from the Times of Washington Post. Sorry. I know that's the one you mentioned there. I wasn't sure if that's the one you wanted to bring up first or not.
No. Well, we can bring up the Washington Post one. I just, you're right about the ABC one though. I don't know. What do you think, Trig? Do you think this was a peaceful? It's basically they're trying to paint it as like the Rosa Parks neighborhood.
Yeah.
Well, we're looking into this. It's about the same. It's about 200,000 people. It's if anyone's familiar. I mean, I know we've got a largely English audience, so
we do. Yes.
The reference won't be missed on them. It is actually fairly similar. Maybe a little heavily, not quite so much on the demographics, but very similar to Nottingham, essentially, type sort of numbers of people and crime rate. And anyone that knows about Nottingham and their crime rate, certainly in the 90s, it was run for cover. They're coming at you and they're shooting on
Shottingham, yes.
Yes,
even
Shottingham.
It was per head of capita. I think at one point in the 90s, the most violent place in England, beating Manchester hands down and Liverpool.
Still not beating Glasgow though, but that's a different conversation.
No one can beat Glasgow. You've got Scots in Glasgow.
Fucking Max Boot is
they ruined Scotland.
Max Boot is such a fucking slime ball though. He starts this article with, "It was a conservative writer who coined the phrase, 'ideas have consequences.'"
Oh, it's people have already spotted Maximum Boot in the chat. They call him Max Boot because that's the main component of his diet. Well spotted there.
The mass shooting at a Buffalo supermarket on Saturday, which left 10 people dead, shows the consequences of two of the horrific ideas that have taken root on the American right: support for the Great Replacement theory and opposition to gun control. I think you find the shooter was pretty supportive of gun control by his manifesto.
It basically served as a shopping list for the ATF. There's we're not going to get into this too heavily because I don't want to make this a red lines stream. I want to actually get into a lot of the background on this and a lot of the solid factual basis we have for being very skeptical about these events. But if you read the supposed manifesto, it basically uses a lot of like specifically gun control language. It uses terms like thread. It talks about threaded barrels a lot, which not a lot of people talk about in rifles because most of them have them. It talks about muzzle devices and how great muzzle devices are. And don't you guys want to ban the muzzle devices again? It's extremely bizarre because it's either some like this 18-year-old Zoomer is either doing some like 4D chess of trying to make it look like a 40-year-old federal agent wrote this thing, or a 40-year-old federal agent wrote this thing.
Well, add that and just the bits that he took from the Christchurch manifesto. I was gonna say that they've got bits in here. It's like, oh well, the Christchurch. Oh no, sorry, the Buffalo gunmen attacked ethnic diversity. Why is diversity said to be our greatest strength? Sorry. Yeah, his manifesto demanded, and then he goes on to say, this is the same thing Tucker Carlson says, and then the Great Replacement Theory, blah blah blah. But there's something I've noticed about a lot of these articles that mention this Great Replacement Theory and the things around it. They always make sure that when they talk about it, that it's about voting and electoral strategies.
Yes.
Yeah.
In all the articles we have, and it wasn't even something I deliberately looked for, just in all of them, it is about voting strategies, which I think is their way of basically pulling a limited hangout and sidestepping the issue of whether or not you can even argue that the Great Replacement would have other effects outside of voting demographics, which would, then require you to assume loads of points that make leftism fall down at face value anyway.
It's well, it is. Sorry, my brain's decided to go on strike for a second there. But yes, it is. It is used as a way of getting people to engage with it in a very limited way, and that it's about democracy and it's about how we should interface with the voting and the voting and the majorities in that sense.
Even J.D. Vance, the GOP Senate nominee in Ohio, who, like Masters, is bankrolled by billionaire Peter Thiel, offers an even sicker twist on this demented theory. He says that the Democrats are not only opening the borders to create a shift in the democratic makeup of this country, but that President Biden is deliberating. I should probably say deliberately, but anyway, deliberating letting fentanyl into the country to kill a bunch of MAGA voters in the middle of the heartland. So again, it's still about voting again. I mean, is this them just signalling the fact that the GOP platform for 2024 is stop immigration for the sake of our democracy?
I mean, to a degree, there's also the other side of it that if they sort of go, look, they're trying to wipe out the or make the white race non-existent, or turn them into a minority and become an underclass, you do start getting accused of stoking racial tensions. And if you're on the air and you're a big organization doing that, that's it. They're in real shit. So that there is a degree of walking the fine line with this, because if you look at the Christchurch Shooters manifesto, that I haven't read it in a long time. I think I cast an eye through it at one particular point in time after it happened. But that's it's not talking about voter rights in there and voter blocks. The Great Replacement theory is very differently. It comes from the classic liberal sort of idea that was bandied around a lot in the 80s and in the 90s, which is you get everybody as mixed up as possible, get as much people having interracial babies as possible, and you end racism, guys, because everybody turns into a beigey brownie thing, and there is no white race, there is no black race, we're all just one. Yeah,
there's only interchangeable economic units.
Yeah, we shouldn't lay that at the feet of liberalism. That was the fault of Clement Attlee, because you basically almost quoted from him word from word there.
Yeah. I mean, I remember getting that lesson in. Oh God, I would have been 11. It would have been 1985. Getting that lesson and sitting there going, What? This is nonsense. This is, what shouldn't we in that case be sending lots of white people over to Africa? That did not go down well,
Yeah.
So.
Anyway, just so we
I don't
can
know,
keep churning
Brazil's crying
through.
out for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please make us more white. Yeah, go ahead. We'll skip ahead to the.
I'm
We've
just
had
gonna-
enough boot. We've
Yeah, I was
had
just gonna-
maximum boot.
He's saying nothing. I don't want to hear it. But just that, there is once again one of these events that, whether it's real or not, irrespective of that, can be used to further the perception and manufactured consent around policy that they've been pre-planning for years, as we may see as we go through with some other stuff. But Buffalo shooting, NY probes, bone-chilling social media role. Very convenient at a time when there's a disinformation board getting launched in the US. There's the chat bill we covered the other week coming through the European courts at the moment.
Yes.
And then, commission. And then there's
a
the
lot
online harms
worse,
bill.
I'd say, than the,
is coming in the UK as well. But I'm just saying,
Yes.
obviously all these things aren't the same, but these are all happening at the same time. And then, just funnily enough, they managed to find that this guy that committed the Buffalo mass shooting was supposedly influenced by people on Discord and 4chan and 8chan, and he streamed it to Twitch, a company owned by Amazon, and all this kind of pish.
It's very criminal uses phone to blame.
Yeah,
Because because the tech monopolies have a tech monopoly, you're forced to use their services.
Yeah,
and
I'll
then
tell you
people
what,
use their services.
they can get rid of anonymous online chats. It'll stop feds agitating people to commit terrorist attacks. Maybe the CIA will put up some sort of fight against this because you can't get rid of 4chan, you put us out of business.
Well, it's like 8chan's mentioned here. Like, what fucking year is it? Like, I went on 8chan to look at how bad things had got, and the first thing I saw was a reference to King of Pol. For those of you who remember that.
Oh
God.
It's okay, guys. King of Pol verified the manifesto, and the next reply is IA here. Holy shit, which did make me laugh, but that's because I remember 2014 and it hurts.
Yeah, they don't mention it here, but there was also the point I noticed in the Max Boot article, and I think it comes up in another one, that they're trying to blame Republicans for this because Republicans are, I think the language is honestly something like they're eviscerating gun laws, as we covered over some stuff in the last few weeks. No, they aren't. They're pretty happy to go hand in hand with the Democrats on the sort of gun control policies, whatever they may be, that flavour of the week.
Yes, there has not been a great laxening in American gun laws. I know you're relatively up to date on this as well, Trig. I think you do speak
try
to some
to
of the
keep
Americans.
an eye on this type of thing in American gun laws, and it's whatever is wanted at this point.
Yeah, and I mean we've even got. Sorry, not to interrupt you, but I just want to keep getting through stuff so we're not chugging along. We then have the actual effect of these cries by media figures already viewed, or you can already view, from the fact that you had the ADL the other day essentially tweeting and forcing Telegram to take down any raw footage or content that was publicly supporting the shooter. Which basically meant, anything that's could be anywhere near considered not a complete and utter sort of disavowal must be removed. So there was that series of tweets, and then literally hours later, you've got one of the dudes at Theoltide that runs quite a big page being directly messaged by the admins of Telegram as part of some abuse team or something, is what the account forwarding message looks like. And it's just, he's basically been demanded by Telegram for removing what was just a clip of the raw footage of the attack.
There's obviously a lot of this stuff is being very deliberately highlighted in the news media. There is a very big focus on this. We'll contrast it later with some of the stuff with the whole. I bet people have already forgotten the whole Brooklyn subway shooting thing.
Yep, and then at the same time, we've got here. What was this? This is the one you showed me. The Kiwi Farms getting a big letter from the Australian government asking to remove,
threatening them with fines and using all this blustering language. like they have any jurisdiction over an American company. It's kind of funny, but it reminds me a lot of the European data law, and especially German takedown notices a lot of people get, trying to scare
Yes.
them into removing content. It's very similar to those.
All I'm saying is we're slowly ticking up the scale.
We are slowly
ticking up the scale.
But what all this is in service of, obviously there's the gun control angle. That is so obvious. And there's actually now a body armor angle as well. They're very much going after civilian access to body armor, which is, again, a very...
They've been doing that in England for quite a while now. They do not like you having body armor over here. Can't quite stop you. But they can't quite stop you, but they...
The thing is, having body armor in commission of a crime in New York State is already a crime. It was already illegal for him to have it's like illegal to have body armor and a loaded rifle without like reasonable excuse or something like that.
That's cheating. You can't do that.
Yeah, basically, the New York State already has laws against misuse of body armor. They don't have laws against it in the abstract. They might do quite soon, but of course the gun control and the body thing was obvious. But what is less obvious here is the way this is being used as a kind of the ratchet on the social media question. In light of this tragedy, and it's only really so long that places like Kiwi Farms has a luxury to thumb its nose at Australia because it's a bubble. It's not somewhere the normies go. It's a website that was ostensibly created to document Christian. It's an outgrowth of the Quickie.
But very much by that same sort of function, it could also disappear very quickly without very many people missing it.
I was about to get to that. Yes, it's somewhere that can be lanced like a boil and excised, drained like an abscess, in the same way that 8chan did in the wake of the 2016 election.
Because what I noticed, there was obviously that ADL one where they went direct for Telegram, but other people aren't mentioning Telegram. So I'm trying to wonder, is that the new place to just kind of funnel us all into?
It does seem to be the newest containment place, yes.
Not necessarily in the way that something like Parler or Getter or anything like that was, very clearly like a data gathering exercise from the get-go, really, with the way it sprung up out of nowhere with quite a lot of support from people who we all knew couldn't be trusted anyway. But I don't know, because there seems to be a massive influx of a lot of bot stuff going on in Telegram, but I suppose that's probably a different story for a different time.
It is, yes. I've quickly rearranged this because it's in a bit of the wrong order.
Yeah.
But the other outgrowth we have directly from this, before we move on to the background stuff, because we are doing pretty good with this. We have managed to get most of this out of the way in the first half hour. The other point to this is the bill that has been passed, ostensibly as a bill in a reaction, or it's been framed as a bill in reaction to this shooting, but it's a bill that's been brought off the shelf. It's a bill that was introduced and really went nowhere in 2019.
Shall we start with
specifically
the CNN one here? Yeah, House passes bill to prevent domestic terrorism in the wake of the Buffalo mass shooting. So how are they going to prevent terrorism this time? Didn't work last time, just throw more money at it?
They're creating a specific, even though the agencies themselves have remit over this, they're creating basically a DHS, FBI, an alphabet soup. They're creating a joint task force agency that specifically has remit to pursue quote-unquote domestic terrorism. Hand in hand with the Disinformation Center, they now have a victimizing American citizens essentially as Guantanamo Bay occupants ministry.
Well, yeah, it's the same as the covert demonstrations and something else squad that the Metropolitan Police had for a while to break up BNP and radical communist groups in South England.
Yes, it's also what was heavily used against people like the EDL when they existed.
Yes.
Although they were a bit more heavily guided We should probably do that at some point, but heavily guided by the UK glowies.
Hmm.
And later, interestingly, not the UK glowies, but other glowies.
Yes.
Because the EDL got an awful lot of funding from a certain country in the Middle East.
Yeah. House Democratic leaders had planned to bring an earlier version of the bill to the floor in April, but the effort was derailed after progressive members objected to the measure, which they said could be used to target civil rights activists or left-leaning groups. Make sure you write us out of first, please.
Yes, it's what this is. It is another
Yeah,
in the
because then
wake of this
they go on
tragedy.
just straight to say we've worked out some of the concerns people have about civil liberties, which were legitimate concerns, and I think we've worked that out, and I think we will have agreement on that. I know what that means. Friend enemy. The sub.
Yeah, basically yes.
A little bit in been reading Imperium by Yoki. There's a big bit in it where he's kind of just rehashing a lot of Schmidt, but he does point out that the reflection of sovereignty is of course the ability to hold the monopoly of painting the inner enemy and using the political to do so.
That really what is what this is. It is the really the third incarnation, but it's the latest incarnation of the American War on Terror coming home, because it's a much more long-running story than most of us realize. It's something that we kind of take for granted now, almost, that we live in this world of the inward-looking, war on terror. That 9/11 first was turned outwards and then was turned inwards. But we also don't memorialize victims of shootings in the same way. Not all shooting victims are created equal.
No, they are not.
No. Oh. Yeah, very much so.
I know, Trig. As a resident old man, I'm
Oh no!
I'm sure you can tell us how different, rhetorically at least, things are from even the way they were in the 1990s when it comes to terrorism. Because I remember, when I was a teenager,
So just
that they
quickly
would
for
use
context, this is the HR 1931. That is the House bill that they then voted on, which is just a rehashed Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act from 2019. So when they talk about it in here being like, oh, well, it was, where do they put? Yeah, earlier version of the bill to the floor in April. That's a load of shit, because it's been presented to the floor probably 2 or 3 times prior to that.
Yes, it has.
And just like that, they pass it.
Like I said, it was unthinkable. But in the wake of this tragedy, it's the ratchet. It's the extraordinary event that short circuits the normal politics, in quotes, to create a situation in which extraordinary laws are passed and then they stay in the books forever. As I was saying, I remember as a teenager, the terrorist threat level used to be set on the news every night. They would say that that the terrorist threat level has been changed from elevated to moderate or whatever, and this went on for years, especially in the wake of the July 7/7 bombings, in London. But that was something that'd be something that seems relatively abnormal now, because it's largely been replaced with the biological narratives and the climate narratives. But that was just normal back in 2007 in Britain. You would be daily told how scared to be of terrorism that day.
It was, it was normal from pretty much the moment the Twin Towers came down on
Where were you?
9/11,
Where were you?
Yeah. Prior to that, though, mass shooting events, things like the Dunblane massacre, things like the Michael Ryan incident, etc., in England, were very rare, and there was nothing in the 90s. Terrorism was almost a thing of the past, because if you go back further, you'd got the 80s, at which point you'd got the IRA phoning up going, there's a bomb in a car in this place, and everyone would freaking leg it, and the police would come in and they'd either find it or not, or somewhere else a car would go bang and a politician would get yeeted, or a pub would explode, or what have you. But I mean, the IRA were very, very active in the 80s. We weren't afraid of terrorism back. It was just, some paddy's going to do something and it's going to hurt somebody at some point, but I can't tell you when and where, so just go and carry on with your day. Stiff upper lip, old chaps. It probably won't happen to you, so just carry on, and regardless, you can't let them get to you. Then they win.
Yeah, it's extraordinary that Manchester City Centre essentially got forcibly remodeled. Was that 19? It was the very early 90s.
Was.
As the
And
people in chat keep mentioning Louis Levi. I believe you did ask him earlier on in the week if he could make it, but
yeah, I didn't get a response from him, unfortunately. I think he's probably quite a busy man at the moment. I don't
either
know how
that
often
or
he
he's
comes to
still
Scotland.
on the run.
Maybe yes.
That's the real cover up.
I will try and get him on again at some point, guys. But no, he seems to be quite busy, so I'll leave him be for now. There's probably about 50 other people who've had the same idea, so he's probably bombarded with requests at the moment. But yeah, we shall try and move on because we have to.
Well, I was gonna say there is like an anarcho-tyranny angle to all of this. I think. Oh,
Yeah.
get that to. Can I get
what I was going to get to is the give me the right global crisis, and I'll give you the new world order.
Which seems to have chaos. It always is.
Yeah, which just seems to have come in 9/11 terror. Oh my god, people really react to this fear thing really well. Screw the stiff upper lip thing, guys. We can control the masses through scaring the living bejesus out of them by telling them to be afraid. It didn't work on my generation. My generation, because those of us that grew up during the Cold War were literally told every day the bombs will drop from the sky, you'll all be turned into fucking atomic waste within seconds. Be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. Eventually you just
I've also seen When the Wind Blows, yes.
Yeah, eventually you just go, meh, I don't care. If it happens, it happens. Sod it. Yeah,
the
but
Gen X has become like the new silent generation.
Yeah, because
they are missing in action.
Well, we're not afraid of it, but we're just carrying on regardless, by and large. Boomers are acting terrified as always. They always were terrified of it for some reason. My mum's
that's
generation.
What the Cold War did to them.
Yeah, they lived in terror, but the ones that actually grew up with it as small children just sort of went, meh, whatever, bring it. I hope I'm living next to Ground Zero, because at least then it'll be quick. And
I was going to say that's much more Gen X nihilist kind of attitude. That's why they aren't scared, because they just don't care. However,
that's the point. Yeah, there is the whole thing about them becoming basically the new silent generation. But the point I was trying to make previously before we got slightly sidetracked was the fact that not all murderers are created equal. If you look. If you look at the death toll of the Buffalo shooting, it's 10 people. I think is that 10 people total, or is it 10 people killed and wounded? I can't remember.
I think there's 11 wounded. Oh, maybe a couple more wounded, but yes, I think it's 10. 10 is the fatality total.
But no,
it's not quite a Cho Sung-Wei, but
there's a big sort of anarcho-tyranny angle to all of this, though, because we are told, we need to fight white supremacist terrorism, we need to fight right-wing extremism, blah 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 blah. And meanwhile, Chicago weekend, 5 dead, 29 wounded. The most read articles next to unarmed 13-year-old boy shot and seriously wounded. Gun goes off in school, students wounded. Then we've got another one here, 6 killed and 18 others wounded, including 12-year-old boy. So this, you're not supposed to give a shit about. Nor are you supposed to give a shit that, that's going to be very small on the screen. I'm not too sure if I'll zoom this in or not and ruin it. But it's just like a heat map of crime in Buffalo. And that big purple section right across there. That's right where that street is, where it all happened.
Yes.
So for them to portray this kind of event as like, oh, well, they've just, he's come and ruined the peace. What fucking peace? There was no peace.
Buffalo, New York is as we've talked about, is a city of 250,000 people in the entire greater metro area.
Hmm.
That is the entire. That's not Buffalo proper. That's the entire metro area, and it has roughly 67 homicides and 60 specifically shooting homicides in an average year, and that has been relatively consistent since about 2008, from all the statistics I can find, and that is roughly 5 a month. So that's more than one a week.
Hmm.
So more than once a week, there is a shooting death in Buffalo, New York.
And that is only the ones that get reported.
Is
Yes.
this
Is
where
always the
Buffalo
thing.
Soldier came from? Is it the reality of
But
it?
no, just like the very simple nature of the fact that you're pretty much almost 1 in 3 times, or sorry, you're almost 3 times more likely to be subject to a violent crime in Buffalo than you are anywhere else in New York State on average.
It is higher crime than 93% of all U.S. cities.
Which is hilarious. The fact they
Yes.
tout this is safer than 8% of US cities.
Yes.
So it's in the least safe, like lower 10%.
There's only 7% of U.S. cities that have higher murder rates than Buffalo, which
Look,
is.
look, Chicago's worse, guys. I mean, what more do you want?
By the way, in
Ugh.
Chicago, that's not 11 deaths and 47 wounded over 2 weeks. That's
That was
2
a weekend.
weekends.
Yeah.
That's 4
Yes.
days.
I know, right?
That's 4 normal days in Chicago, a city with no gun stores.
hmm
That's a nice
There you
fact
go.
for you.
This is the real thing though about this. Is not only is there more crime, but the crime is so dense. Crimes per square mile 260 compared to the New York State fucking
Whoa.
average of 36. I mean, it is 10 times higher than the national median rate of like crime density. So how can you even begin to pretend that it's this peaceful, idyllic neighborhood where this horrible person just happened to do something that not one person in this neighborhood would think of doing?
This is the first time that a mass shooting of the gang variety in Buffalo would barely make state level news.
Yep.
Never mind national news. This is probably the first time that a large scale shooting event in Buffalo has moved the needle on a national scale in decades, if it ever has at all. This is really, on an aggregate sense, business as usual. You shoot a few people with a manifesto and everyone goes crazy. It's very Dark Knight Joker speech, but it is somewhat true that this has been, as a tragic event, been singled out for this national narrative because there was a useful piece of paper which may or may not have been the idea of the shooter.
Meanwhile,
Yeah.
like the real race war between blacks and Asians and blacks and Jews
Latinos.
that is
Yeah.
carrying out across Brooklyn and all sorts of other areas in the States gets completely ignored. And,
See-
covered up, essentially.
Do we know that this manifesto is definitely his? Because you're right. The manifesto reads like well. It wouldn't surprise me if it was written in invisible ink and just appeared on a piece of paper straight afterwards. It glows so much.
It is basically a laundry list of desirable aspects.
The CIA agent peed on the piece of paper and all 180 pages of it were right there. 180 pages! The guy was too busy, jacking it to furry porn to be writing 180 pages, which is why it's all copy and pasted out of the bloody Christchurch one.
It is, and there's also, like I said, a massive shopping list of things the ATF wants to ban in it in very clunky language. That
I think I might actually have the image for that. I can put that up in a second. However, I want to put another image up first.
It's so bizarre. The way it's phrased, the way it's written, the amount of pages just dedicated to. It's not even listing gear in a way that someone who is a genuine firearms that's pretty good. In a way that a genuine firearms enthusiast would list.
I'll handle them, Martha.
It lists gear in the way that that's it's such a banger, that image in it. The one about Tomato Town's pretty good as well.
Wait, right, I've got the.
You must wipe out Tomato Town.
Do it for Trump. Do
Yes.
it for I don't know, Matt Gaetz or some middling GOP figure. He radicalized me. See,
I
this
was
is the thing I
radicalized
don't
by
get. Just before we get onto the gun thing, because it's interesting in and of itself, but something I've been trying to say to a lot of people, we don't necessarily have to go down the lines of it's all a fed up. I think what makes most sense, given what we've seen so far, is that he was somebody who was genuinely mentally ill, and people online who have otherwise agendas offered him all this stuff that he could basically just use as a cannon to glorify himself as like a psycho. He is
Yeah.
not someone who acted in an effort to forward a right wing agenda of any form.
No.
And I think that can be obvious from the fact that if you were going to do that, surely the first thing you would do is cloak yourself in the symbols of leftism. I mean, why was he not running around that store where he's like M4 painted like the trans flag, with like BLM patches all over him, and go and shoot up a like, I'm not even going to say the word for the place of worship because I think saying shooting that word in the same place might get us in trouble. But you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like go do it for the Palestinian solidarity. Don't do it for Uncle H. That would seem to me like a really effective strategy, not for forwarding and pushing forward right wing ideas into the mainstream in a illegitimate form, which is what this is doing. Instead, actually forward right wing objectives in the real world, which this wasn't going to do at all.
No.
He could just dress up like a furry, someone's saying in chat. Yeah, but then he could just as easily be a tradcath. So
there is a lot of crossover there, it seems.
yeah, but this is very interesting. Unthreaded muzzle. He's talking about how these are one of the things I dislike about this gun, and he starts talking about all the specifics and the numbers, and he's pricing it all. As you said, it's like the Fed shopping list. You will see an article at some point in the next week or two from one outlet or another. It essentially says like, do you know someone could buy all this gear for like $1,100?
I went through it. Apart from bayonet lugs, he lists in the same language every single feature that is named in the Federal Assault Weapons Ban of 1994. He itemizes
the ghost of Reagan. Where's that image when we need it?
No, it's really the ghost of Clinton, but he set the ball rolling. Mr. Imports ban, Mr. 86 machine gun ban. Most conservative president in the last 4 decades, guys. Reagan as a whole thing in of itself. But it serves, like I said, it's a shopping list in exactly the same language, which again, it could be some kind of 4D chess, but this guy he honestly doesn't strike me as intelligent enough. That's all I would say on that. But there is a whole other angle to this. I'm going to try and cover this as briefly as possible, but all of this that we're seeing now finds its roots in the narratives of the anti-militia movement of the early 90s. First of all in the Bush Senior era, and then accelerated in the Clinton era.
Let me get
at the end of the Cold.
Read these up in the order they're in the document. So there's the ABC one. LA Times, and then Independent.
It's the LA Times first, and then the ABC, then the Independent.
Cool.
Because I'm going to go in chronological order here. But one of the most lasting events of this entire kind of side of news narrative is Ruby Ridge. Because Ruby Ridge, I think it really is the defining moment in the American militia movement, and it's also the defining moment in the FBI and the ATF stepping up their remit from basically being glorified ghetto janitors through the 80s with the war on drugs into being the arbiters of acceptable political thought in America.
Yeah, this is actually hilarious. Undercover informer for the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms told a Senate subcommittee Friday that white separatist, they didn't call him a white supremacist for once, Randy Weaver took the initiative in selling him 2 illegal sawed-off shotguns that the federal firearms dude asked him to make, starting a series of events that led to the bloody 1992 shootout and the siege at Weaver's cabin in which 3 people were killed. They basically try to blame him for it when I think, is it not pretty much clear now that we all understand that he was pretty much talked into doing it?
There's some great stuff in here. Um, Basically, this informant had been badgering him for 3
Yeah, it was
years.
Kenneth Fadley.
Yes, to sell him shotguns. We don't know if the shotguns were sawed off when he sold them to him. That was never established.
Yeah.
The firearms charges, by the way, Weaver was cleared of.
Mm.
The only thing Weaver served time for was missing a court date. He was never convicted of anything apart from basically contempt of court, because he missed the court date because he was holding up, holding up in his home, basically waiting for the feds to come and get him, which they were going to do. If you haven't studied the history of Ruby Ridge, because it is extraordinary. It's extraordinary what happened there. But one of the most enduring facts of it is that Randy Weaver, the entire siege was caused by a federal informant who had been informing on Weaver for 3 years essentially because of his belief system. He wasn't even a particularly active member of. They accused him of being a member of the Aryan Nation. He'd been to a couple of meetings out of curiosity.
Yeah.
And had what they referred to as expressed anti-government sentiment. And that was seen as the pretext to fill his life with federal informants who were paid basically by the crimes they could accuse him of. And there's a great bit here where he says that he misspoke in court, which basically means he committed perjury.
God, the Dianne Feinstein.
Yes.
Was involved in this.
Senator Arlene Specter, the subcommittee chair, and the GOP president hopeful noted that Friday that Fadley had testified in federal court 2 years ago that he had assumed his informant payments from the ATF would be greater if Weaver were convicted of selling illegal weapons. Fadley said he had misspoken in court.
Yeah, because then it goes on to say further down here, but asked by senators to characterize Weaver as he claimed to know Fadley called a proponent of racism, hate towards minority and individuals, blah blah blah. It would be very violent towards those individuals and towards the United States. He's un-American. ATF Director John M. McGaw, who followed Fadley as a subcommittee witness, said the informant was paid more than $5,000 for his work on Weaver's case, but McGaw insisted no informer ever gets a bonus if the information leads to a conviction.
That is complete lies. That I think was actually found to be policy at the time.
Yeah.
But for those of you who don't know, the Ruby Ridge siege was triggered by a federal informant who, on very shaky grounds, on grounds that didn't hold up in court, accused Randy Weaver of selling him 2 sawed-off shotguns, which he was found to have initiated the sale of, therefore attempting to entrap Randy Weaver. Who I will once again say was never committed of a crime apart from failing to meet one of his court dates. And it is a narrative. His status as a white supremacist is used as a cudgel to beat his name with in the news. There's an article from 2017 at ABC here that I'll go through in a sec. Trig, out of curiosity, did Ruby Ridge get any coverage here in the UK that you remember of? Really?
Oh, a little, but it was very. Oh, this happened. White nationalists, etc. There was no deep dive. There was no in depth. It was just, this has happened. Bunch of people were killed. Not really anything. It barely. When was it exactly? When was Ruby Ridge? It was
1992.
92. Just trying to think. I mean, this is an unfortunate period of time where I did not have my eye particularly on the ball because I was too busy being at university and enjoying all of the things that involved in the evening. And I wasn't really totally engaged with what was going off at the time.
Oh god, yeah, I've noticed what they're doing. Public protest by self-declared white supremacists, which is the Aryan Nation dudes basically showing up to try and check on Randy Weaver and see if he was all right because they saw all the ATF vans. Because I remember some of this footage, there was other stuff that actually paints all the protesters in a really good light because they're like, just try to ask the police, like, what's going on up there? Like, just tell us. And they're like, no, we won't tell you. Yeah, public protest by self-declared white supremacists, criticisms of how police handled a violent standoff, 3 deaths. These events recall last week's outbursts in Charlottesville, Virginia, but actually describe a 25-year-old incident in the forested region of northern Idaho, about 40 miles south of the Canadian border.
This was an incident, by the way, in which the ATF murdered a 14-year-old boy after shooting his dogs in front of him.
And also shooting Randy Weaver's wife and killing her as well.
They killed Randy Weaver's pregnant wife, and they killed his mother. If I remember correctly. No, sorry. They killed Randy Weaver's wife, pregnant wife. And I think she was shot basically through him, but he survived.
Mm.
It's a harrowing story about what happened there, and he was actually awarded a $1.1 million settlement for the wrongful death of both his son and his wife.
Mm.
So Randy Weaver was vindicated in court twice. Basically, they can paint him as a white supremacist all they want.
I'm sure that money went a long way to making him feel loads better about that.
Well, yes, but it's still amazing though that we have this, trying to link it to Charlottesville, describing him as an Aryan nation, the evil white supremacist that galvanized all these people.
I'm sorry we shot your son, your dog, and your pregnant wife. Here, have some loose change from the government.
The story is still white supremacist siege. The story is never government wrongfully murders 3 people as upheld by the courts. And that's something I wanted to, really hammer home to people, that this, no matter what happens, no matter who is in the right or in the wrong, this will be the narrative. And this is a pre-made narrative. And no matter what you do, no matter how you grovel, and no matter how you try and play their game, play your optics, essentially, they will always, to quote Mr. Peter Quinas's latest article, they will always Randy Weaver your ass.
No Albert Drydens, no David Koreshes, and no Randy Weavers. You will not declare yourself sovereign, and you will not decide this exception on your own lands.
Yeah. You can grill.
Not for us.
You can build
one thing Mr. Quinas' article was wrong about is we do already live in Ancapistan, but you just have to have enough money to be there.
Not so much.
If you're Elon Musk, if you are Bezos, you are living in Ancapistan. You are flying where you want. You are doing pretty much what you want.
It certainly didn't help John McAfee.
John McAfee ran out of money.
Well, yeah, because they ran him out of money.
Yeah,
because they ran him out of town, and then ran him out of money, and then ran him out of life.
Yeah.
So yes, my optics, but he's I like if anything Mr. Quinas's Quinones, I never know how to say it. But Mr. Quinoa's
anything you're still
Moxie.
wanting out of this ABC article here? I've just realised how long it is.
No. The last thing I wanted to go over really before we move on to some of the other context stuff, because there's a lot more, is the fact that this is very prescient, because Randy Weaver died 6 days ago. And there was very little news about it. I didn't know until I was researching all this stuff. But yeah, Randy Weaver died this week.
No, I saw some people, shall we say, reporting it on Telegram.
I've been quite busy, so I missed
yeah, no,
that.
exactly.
Yeah.
Can you believe these evil separatist terrorists who are just living in the rural woods menacingly? Yeah, they want to be left alone in such a menacing fashion. It's unbelievable. No exit.
He's described as a radical. The most radical thing that Randy Weaver did was refuse to become a federal agent, at which time they resolved to murder his entire family for doing that.
Yep, you won't join the Aryan nations and become an informant for us, so you must be cut loose. Because if you were able to tell the story fully of how you've been approached, people would maybe see what was going on.
Oh yeah.
And again, it's the same way that it was then treated with Waco and David Koresh. That was every single different right wing thing until they got it all over with, burnt it down, and then basically hid it all away by tapping into the narrative and making sure it was always mentioned in accordance with Ruby Ridge, always mentioned in accordance with either white separatism or white nationalism, or, as you said, they're building this sort of canon so that as and when is needed, they can tie basically any event to this narrative and be like, oh, look, it's white nationalist terrorism on the rise again.
Oh, what we are building here is a canon of the involvement of federal informants, though.
This is
The
well,
Ruby Ridge
well.
Siege.
See, this is the thing. We can build one by just looking at the other.
Yes.
Mm.
The entire point here is to go into, we don't know the specifics of what happened with the Buffalo case, but when the dirty laundry comes out about every single case like it, you see that it's feds all the way down. And the biggest, most recent case of that, which I think we kind of need to re-go over, we've been over it on the stream before, is the Whitmer case, the Michigan kidnapping, because this, I don't know how they
Is this
managed to do
the
it, being a
BuzzFeed
BuzzFeed
one you're
article,
wanting here?
because there's bits from it we didn't read previously, but this BuzzFeed article in relation to the use of federal informants is scathing. I'm still continuously amazed by it. And there's a section I just want to read verbatim because it is so good. It's so good.
Notice this. This was, the closing of this was around April earlier in the year when they were gonna, launch that bill and stuff. And
Yeah.
where
This
you
was-
want to go from in here?
It's a part that says their statements. It's quite far down, unfortunately. It's also in the document. It's the bit that's in the document, but yeah, this was meant to be, I think, the event that triggered the passing of the other bill. But they, as it's described, we described earlier on a previous stream about how they stacked the deck in this case, about how they managed to stack the prosecution so heavily in their favor, but still managed to lose because what they were saying was so incredulous and their witnesses were so blundering and incompetent. They managed to essentially destroy their own case with their own evidence. Because all of the evidence that was brought by the defense was in fact denied in court. These people were railroaded. I think I quoted earlier, it reminds me of the whole Hillary Clinton losing in 2016 thing, and my favorite
Yes.
comment of the night being some hotep dude going, "Bitch, how do you lose a rigged election?" Which is such a wonderful quote.
Yeah, no, I found the section you were looking for.
Yes. Yeah, talking about the fact that they'd had a lot of, let's say, Fed posty talk. Their statements, however nasty they might sound, were just talk, the defense said, and therefore protected by the First Amendment. To the degree that there was any actual plan to kidnap Whitmer, they said, it was the FBI that had cooked it up, while the government's minions, as many as a dozen confidential informants, lured the defendants into half-heartedly playing along. So that's 4 defendants, one of which may or may not have been an informant themselves, and a dozen federal agents and informants. They said it was a case of entrapment, and they had hundreds of recordings, text messages, and Facebook posts that would shine a very different light on the government's narrative. They included exhibits showing informants smoking cannabis with the defendants, plying them with offers of cash, and working them up into a lather with anti-government talk of their own. There was evidence of informants and FBI agents discussing ways to lure more suspects into the case, and extensive audio of defendants discussing absurd schemes involving stolen Black Hawk helicopters, 300 strong armies, we know that's a reference to, and newly minted silver currencies that the defense believed showed the men were simply fantasizing. So basically, the normal kind of like chat that goes on in these circles was recorded, recontextualized. A whole bunch of informants were paid to say there was a kidnapping plot, and they just ran with it. And they were hoping that they could throw enough of the defense's evidence out of court to secure a conviction. But fortunately, they bungled it. They were so overconfident and bungled it so greatly that we have here BuzzFeed taking them to pieces in an article that is. There's so much of this. We read some of it previously, but this is.
See, this gets
it's
to the
such a clear
point where
picture.
it starts to get so so obvious that it makes me begin to think that, like, maybe they're getting out on the long game so that when maybe certain people do go out and commit what might be referred to as direct action, large sections of us will go, "No, it's feds. Don't believe in it."
No, I just think this was really the way that they stacked the evidence. This really was an attempt to have these people essentially be disappeared by the court system, and to have them buried in this mountain of evidence, in quotes, that they've managed to essentially bring out of thin air, because the demand for white supremacist terrorism is far, far higher than the supply.
Indeed, it is. It's almost that they would need to have a model by which to manufacture them by, or something like that.
Yes, you can see the through line here through things like Ruby Ridge, through the Whitmore, and through into a lot of these other cases, with these supposed lone wolf terrorists bringing out the same rhetoric, the same canon, pulling on the same boogeyman. It's very, very likely that there was at least people who were federal informants and agents involved in the quote unquote grooming of this person. There is too much of a through line, and in every case where we find what are supposed to be these genuine white separatists, all we find are in fact nests of federal agents pumping them full of all of this frankly ridiculous rhetoric that nobody really believes unless they are, like this person seemed to be, genuinely mentally ill.
Well, it's not even that no one genuinely. It's like so much of it was just nonsense as well. I mean, there was like a part of the manifesto where he went on at length about how well, I support LGB, but we've got to drop the T because that's a mental illness. Like, that seems to me that it's trying to have a little bit of something to argue about for everyone.
Well, he didn't even say that he hates
God.
trans people. He basically came out as a trans medicalist.
I'm just noticing some of the chats. Like, you must be from Buffalo. Because there's just like there is like a dozen messages from this person, like, retard stats. Come on, man, not true. Safe city. Cope. You live in a shithole.
Well, these are the stats from Buffalo PD.
Yeah, so these are probably about half as bad as it actually is.
Like I'm sorry, but these are the official crime statistics for Buffalo, New York. I'm sorry. Who is this person and why are they? I don't think a rate is that high comparative amongst. It is. It's higher than 97% of all U.S. cities.
I don't think 50 homicides a year is a lot.
not 50, 67.
Well, exactly. 50 is a lot. 67 is even more. I mean, London, I don't think comparatively rate-wise touches that.
No, nowhere near per capita. It touches that. I'm sorry, but we have to defer to our inner empiricoid and say that the science of Buffalo being a ghetto shithole full of gangbanger murders has been fact checked and been found true.
Rob saying in chat, it's certain street and certain hoods, and exactly that's kind of the point we're making earlier on. That the density of the crime there is, ridiculous, especially in that street. Is it Roosevelt or whatever it is street? It's slap bang in the middle of this, essentially like hub of crime, and one of the most densest crime hubs in the US. So did all this stuff about it was so peaceful, and people have never seen this before. Ugh. It's the shit and the ignorance that people have that they just play on constantly.
I don't know. Maybe we've been keyworded for saying Buffalo too many times. But there's another thing I wanted to compare this to, briefly, is the disappearing of both the Vegas shooter and the Brooklyn subway shooter. And we have these news events like the Randy Weaver's. What was the guy with the bowl cut called who shot up that
Dylan
church? Yeah, Dylan, like the Dylan Roofs of this world. These weird, the prototypical, basically the cartoon character, white shooter, in quotes, who goes after a meaningless target of nobodies, who is pumped up through large amounts of what we can see is glowy derived rhetoric. Whether or not they are deliberately or directly or indirectly steered by them is is slightly beside the point. Basically, the entire American quote-unquote white supremacist movement, and in a sense, many of the global aspects of it, as we'll get onto a little bit later, are
Buffalo.
affectations of the American intelligence state, because very much like they did with Islamists in Afghanistan in the 80s, they create their own enemies and fund their own enemies, nurture their own enemies, so they can turn around and justify the increasing of power later to fight their own, to
Yeah.
fight these Buffalo. That's pretty good. To
I
fight these
wish
enemies.
I wish I
The,
could
the,
find the document. I was looking at something the other day. In fact, it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Before this happened, I was looking at something about, it was a spin-off from the MK Ultra and everything else, which was a how do we control and get rid of the Second Amendment. And they'd come to the conclusion that the best way to do that was to make huge amounts of weapons available for the mentally ill and the criminally minded to drive up and ignore, well, sort of drive up mental illness and ignore mental illness in armed sort of people at school to essentially create school shootings.
Yeah.
And to use that as a method to get rid of the Second Amendment, to drive public opinion. Essentially, again, referencing things that had happened in England, like the Dunblane shooting and various other things, the Michael Ryan incident, as I mentioned earlier, basically ended gun rights in the UK. And they'd seen these things happen and gone, okay, we can further that by pushing a little bit in the right direction here, pushing, making these sorts of things available over there. And whether
I'm
or not I'm
reminded.
reading more conspiracy theory
No,
nonsense,
you're
and
there.
I'm trying to remember the name of the damn project, because I've got a feeling it's Project Orion. But if you look at Project Orion, that is just nuclear propulsion systems from
A
the
good
1950s.
example of what you're talking about is the Fast and Furious project.
Mm,
And letting the gun walk
yeah,
is a huge. For those of you who don't know, the federal government in California actually explicitly authorized by President Obama, because it was one of his weird flagship programs of crime fighting, was this Fast and Furious project. They were pumping American semi-automatic and even automatic arms into Mexico and trying to see what washed back over the border as some
yeah,
harebrained, supposedly crime-fighting scheme of, oh well, we'll just track where the guns go. Hundreds
Oh,
of firearms were
that'll
allowed
go
to
swimmingly.
walk.
mm,
Yeah, hundreds of firearms were allowed to quote unquote walk during this. They called it gun walking. And essentially, it was the federal government providing the cartel with, this is the only ones we know about, with masses of weapons that would then find their way back over the border and contribute to U.S. gun crime with illegal weapons.
mhm,
And they could create these problems for themselves. That's a great example, because
yes.
as a crime fighting strategy that makes no fucking it's so far beyond retarded. It stretches and then breaks plausibility.
It does. I mean, it is. These are all spin-offs from Psyops that is, essentially came from MK Ultra and various other things. Incidentally, recently, have you seen the amount of misinformation about MK Ultra that has been coming out lately about
So
how
that's the limited
MK Ultra
hangouts for you.
backfired completely and actually created free-thinking liberals of the 60s and 70s, and it was yes it happened, but actually it was a complete backfire, and nothing came of it at all. I was like, no, you're just admitting to bits of it. You're doing the same shit again, essentially.
That's the saying.
Uh,
It's the limited hangout every time.
yeah, yeah. It's making me feel like I'm going crazy.
Well, the big thing about the Las Vegas shooting is that it is I think it the single deadliest shooting in
Yep.
American history.
Yes, I think so.
I mean, he
After
blew.
Pulse.
So certainly, yes, as far as shootings done by Americans on American soil at other Americans, yes, I mean certainly there have been military
No,
incidents where more.
his kill count is higher than Pulse.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
Pulse is second to it.
Yes,
I
yes,
forgot that.
yes.
I don't know if I got that the wrong way round.
No, I'm just saying. Yeah, it's he does. How many did oh, that's school shootings, isn't it? With Cho Sung Wee,
Mm.
Hammerman. Um,
Oh, so it
he
means
yeah he
you get to ignore that one time, like the FBI bombed a whole district in, I think it was
yeah
either
they bombed the city block. Yeah.
Cleveland or something like that, and killed God knows how many people. But hey, we'll gloss over that.
Yeah, Buffalo's a city of 250,000 people. Um, that was the population in 2020. So yeah, 250,000 people, basically a murder a day.
That's a question. Did Uncle Ted come out of MK Ultra? That rings
Oh,
a
murder a
bell.
day.
Ye-
So
I
basically a
don't.
murder a week. Sorry, more than a murder a week. Yeah, Buffalo is the second city in the US for arson.
What's number
Safe city, you
one?
guys.
What's number one? That's what I want to know.
Taking a rough guess, Chicago.
Nah, it'll be somewhere weird in like the slightly further south. Detroit. No, that makes
Detroit.
sense.
Of
That's just
course,
to keep
yeah.
everyone warm, mind.
I'm gonna say Detroit, like that's just doing like that's being nice in Detroit. There's so many empty lots there. You're doing the demolition crew's job for them.
Yeah, you're
I don't
returning
know
it
who
all
this
to
person is
nature.
trying to be like. No, it is less safe than 93% of American cities. There is no arguing that Buffalo is a nice, safe place. It is ridiculous to say so. Um, anyway, yeah, the Vegas shooting it's the single most deadly shooting in American history. It is an extraordinary attack from an elevated position on a live concert. So much about it is extraordinary, and it was this amazing headline story for maybe 2 weeks, and then
Mm.
it disappeared off the face of the earth because so much about it was incongruous. When the hotel security was asked how the man managed to set up and continue firing for 11 minutes, um, the cadence of the weapons, none of it made sense.
Oh,
And
yeah.
because none of it made sense, it was nixed from the news because it achieved its goals very quickly. As we talked about on the Ghost Gun stream, it allowed the ATF to become the de facto defining force of what is and isn't both a machine gun and a firearm. In one fell swoop, it became the arbiter, it became judge, jury, and executioner of US firearms law without a single law or clarification or executive order even having to be
All that
passed.
was required was the state of exception.
Yes. And once the state of exception got, achieved its goal, the story was nixed. The single biggest mass shooting in American history, the investigation was closed after less than 2 years, and no motive was ever found. There are cases still open of murders longer than that. They keep high profile cases open sometimes for decades. I mean, look at Madeleine McCann, for
Mm.
Christ's sake. Yeah, the death of 58 people. If you believe the narrative, slaughtered from an elevated position using a bump stock of all things.
A bump stock.
Though
I mean,
those of you who've ever, there's not many people have shot a bump stock because bump stocks are impractical.
Oh,
They're weird, gimpy range toys. They're jam machines.
how did the 64-year-old man that was not described as to anyone as in shape at all and didn't look in shape by any great means pump what 500 pounds worth of gear up and down freight elevators and then remove a hurricane graded like window?
Yeah, he didn't shoot through the
mhm.
window. He removed it.
You would think
But
those windows probably can't be removed from the inside
no,
for the sake of like removing them and servicing them easier. They would all be mounted on the outside.
it is. Yeah, Vegas does
Maybe.
your head in, but
Oh,
I mean,
Vegas is mad. I remember listening to they've got videos on YouTube of literally sort of forensics experts who were literally sort of worked for the military and so on, acoustics experts going, no, This is all screwed up. I've listened to the shooting. I've listened to the hits, the bullet hits. I've listened to this, that, and the other. There was at least 2 calibers of rifle being used. They were being used at the same time. Bullets are landing at different rates. From you hear the pop, and then you hear the bullet landing, and then you're hearing others firing. So you've got different bullet velocities, and then 2 weeks later, those videos are gone. That channel is gone. Nothing left. Anybody that went against any type of narrative on there that got any sort of type of traction, gone, disappeared immediately. I wish I'd been me back then, because I'd have been backing those videos up and occasionally busting them out onto random channels, because there
It'll
was
be out there
really
somewhere.
solid stuff. Yeah, really solid stuff, really interesting stuff that basically led it to is like, no, this is I am a military forensic audio expert and this, that, and the other, and there was at least 2 sets of shooters, probably 4 men in total, if not more, kind of sort of summations from different positions.
I'm trying to find it. I have some files somewhere backed up which showed that Stephen Paddock at some point actually did own a registered machine gun, which he chose not to use during the Vegas shooting, instead electing to use
That'd have been
a
too
bump
heavy.
stock.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would use a bump stock instead of an actual machine gun for something like that, of course, because a bump stock is clearly far more controlled. I give up. Bumps.
Well,
The way a bump stock works is so ridiculous. It is. It's going to be a good giggle, but it's going to be all over the freaking shop. It's going to be like fully automatic and then some.
it's not. For those of you who know how firearms operate, what happens with a lot of bump stocks is that they overrun.
Yeah.
They reciprocate too fast, and your hammer ends up following the bolt home, and your weapon goes into battery like it has been.
Because it's not
like
it's
you,
not an open bolt gun, so it's not designed to be. It's not the bolt is not designed to free float. And once you fire the weapon so many times that the bolt starts to free float, it catches
What
itself.
happens-
It's a
happens is
safety mechanism.
Well, the hammer follows the bolt home, and it has no more inertia. It has no more spring pressure. There's no more spring pressure on the hammer, and it can no longer fire. The weapon is essentially in a state like it hasn't been racked, like it hasn't been charged. So that's what happens a lot with bump stocks. They also create a lot of malfunctions. They create a lot of jams because the firearm is firing at a rate and at a cadence it is not designed to. Not to get too far into the weeds here, but it's amazing that story was just sent off the face of the earth. We talked about the Brooklyn shooter as well, which you won't have heard of now that that's all been swept under the rug, even though he was some weird black separatist, and he may have actually been some sort of rogue actor, because it doesn't seem like this has been factored into the narrative really. It has just gone away. Yeah. I think the last thing I really want to talk about, though, was actually something to do with the Christchurch shooting, because there's a little bit of kind of watching the media argue with itself as the new narrative comes out is funny. If you Google the words Christchurch shooter Azov, the first result is this article by the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, which is the most NGO name I have ever heard. It's quite funny. But they're an NGO charity. They are basically some pro-democracy website which tries to debunk right-wing conspiracy theories. They're
promoting
trying to
Great Reset conspiracy narratives. The Great Reset conspiracy in Australia.
Well,
so is this then basically just being like, yep, there's no link between Azov Battalion and the Buffalo shooter. No need to look. Don't go looking. Please don't.
And then we have the well-known white supremacist outlet ABC News in 2019 talking about the link between the Christchurch shooter and the Azov battalion.
Well, something
And-
I want to mention is that I think there was a brief thing reported about how some of the people that favourite of some of the suspicious folk on Telegram, Patriot Front,
Yeah.
some of their top flight members went over to meet members of Azov battalion in Ukraine, and they supposedly went over and just learned some MMA moves. So you don't need to be
Yes.
worried about that, and you definitely don't need to be worried about what that's going to cause in the American right-wing scene, with it being connected to NATO-funded neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine.
Yes, it's interesting. It's interesting that especially the Christchurch shooter and the Buffalo shooter had definite links in terms of, where their allegiances supposedly lay, their insignias, their supposed ideology is this NATO soup, I'll call it, of strategic, like, gay Nazism, in which they bring out all this soup of not quite their talking points to have what are essentially in Ukraine regime acceptable Nazis, which is not a phrase I thought I would say, but it's something that seems rather inevitable now thinking of it. It's like, why didn't I think this was possible?
Yeah, you've got to have the regime sanctioned National Socialism.
It reminds me of what was the saboteur group called in West Germany and Italy that was made up of explicitly made up of former fascists.
Is it Gladio?
Yeah.
The stay behind force.
Yes. I don't know. I remember when the Christchurch thing happened, and there was a whole bunch of media outlets jumping on the fact that he had an association with and had expressed admiration for the Azov battalion.
Yeah. No, he didn't. He have the Christchurch shooting. That was the one.
New Zealand.
Yeah, that's right. I was just remembering because he had co-conspirators that were never tracked down, didn't he?
God,
Yes.
who's this in the chat? It's not an actual neo-Nazi group. Their ideological part calls for things like decentralization, local decision-making, and such. Yeah, I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
Bruh.
Yeah. And tell me again why they wear the black sun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why the spicy windmill sun, my dudes? Why all the National Socialist rhetoric? Why all the 1488 HHs, my dude? It's like the I need to find that. I don't actually know if I have it on here or not. It's like Lenny with the Cow College. It's like, you're only calling us a Nazi regiment because we were founded by a Nazi.
Yeah, someone's got the right idea. ISIS aren't an actual terrorism group; they're just a communications organization.
Yeah, they're
I remember
a farmers insurance board.
I remember a Pakistani friend of mine. I won't mention her name, but nice lass. She hated ISIS. She's always calling it Israeli State Intelligence Service. Ooh, a little closer to home than she might have realised. But yeah, no, she was not a fan.
You're just calling us a cow college because we were founded by a cow. I can't find my meme now, but rest assured it was a good meme. Oh dear.
No, it is hilarious that as much as it is supposedly verboten, like National Socialism, white nationalism, as you said earlier on, there isn't enough supply of it to actually keep up with the demand they want in media. So they're just gonna have to make it up and make it look as if it exists.
Yeah.
And to what extent they are willing to act in regards to making it look like it exists, we could talk about that probably all day.
We could do, yes. But there's, I think we've given people enough of a through line here to show them that largely when you see incidents like this, and when you see supposedly sincere ideology like this, it's very, very likely to either be directly or indirectly just feds all the way down. You know, remember Randy Weaver, remember Buffalo, and remember remember the hilarious collapse of the Michigan trial.
Remember Waco. Remember all sorts of events that you were supposed to forget or only remember as in a certain form.
Remember Tuskegee experiments. Just remember that the U.S. government and other governments in history do really shitty things to their own people all the fucking time.
I don't even think
to think that they've stopped, you know, if you think they've stopped, I've got some real estate on the moon to sell you. It's as simple as that. They are always going to do shit things to you, and then tell you it's you doing it to yourself.
Well, I think some of this stuff goes above just government. I think that a lot of it is politics in the sort of Schmittian sense, but insofar as it's unleashed publicly across everyone, it is totalizing, and it is all of society, and it is well past the point now whereby it's just the articles of state that wander around and set this stuff up and then smash it when they feel free. There is so many other different sort of factions or groups or private organizations or, you know, all sorts of different things that are all connected to this. So as much as you're right, you know, governments do shitty things, I think we need to take away the fact that there is, even within the government, there is its own subset of elite actors and shadowy people.
Oh yeah, and there's people operating above governments. You know, the supranationals, shall we say, that are operating people within governments that do. Yes, when I say governments, perhaps we're better off saying people, untouchable people in power.
The elites.
And can I just say, I'm gutted. Sexychat.xyz adult dating site. I was looking forward to checking that out later.
We do be getting the spam though.
We seem to have pissed somebody off. Yeah,
we get that one a lot recently. That always seems to show up after a certain point.
It does, but we always catch it. So
is there? I don't know. Is there anything else about this we're needing to go over?
Not really. I think we've done it in quite a lean fashion. I'm trying to think if there's anything we missed here. We got a couple minutes left. Is there anything that you guys have thought of in relation to this you didn't get time to say, or?
Well, I think we can continue to look at it through the whole sort of Schmitt angle. As you were saying before, the exceptional state of white nationalist terrorism is still on the rise, and will continue to be so until the powers that be say it's not. Much as you mentioned before, when they used to have like, the terror threats at Red, now that the 7/7 bombings have happened, and they reported it every day on the 6 o'clock news. You know, boom, boom, you'd have the clock fucking going with it. You know, this just in, terror threats.
Yeah, you'd have
now high danger or level red, and it is that, you know, we are in the state of the exception, therefore we as the sovereign powers will do as we please.
Yep. And you've got a whole bunch of people running around going, oh, should I be afraid of Muslims because they're terrorists, or terrorists are Muslims, and then other people going, yes, but you can't say that because that makes you racist. Well, and everyone was just tied up in a big, 2007 onwards, everyone was in a gigantic knot in the UK as to whether or not they were allowed to be racist or phobic, or whether they should be. They're being told one thing, they were being told another thing. The two contradicted each other, and it was kind of the beginning. We were actually well into it at that point because, as I said, it started in 2001. But
no, I'm just noticing Rob in the chat saying how to detect glow, what to watch for would be a good topic to spend time on. Possibly, however, I would suggest that that's not. You don't detect it because you read it rationally. You feel stuff like that. At least
Um,
when
we
I
could go over.
when I've always
We could go over
found
some
people
of
to
the
be
old lore.
suspicious or stuff has been weird and then gone and happened, there was normally always an inkling or some kind of sense prior to that this individual is not as authentic as they try to make themselves out.
You have to detect the glow. You must rely on your unga bunga brain.
Yeah, aye.
You must channel your inner schizo as well. You as we have in the thumbnail. You must channel your inner Terry.
Well,
You
is
must
this
be
not what
able to.
all the COINTEL Pro stuff's all about anyway? It's trying to
Yeah.
spot feds and I don't know. Maybe that's something we could go and look at some point. However, I'd much rather get
There's
cracked into that Surveillance Valley one that I posted in the Telegram the other day.
Yes, that'd be good. There's a concept I'm reminded of when you talk about detecting, genuine actors, and it's relatively simple in these circles because there's quite a long through line from some of the better aspects of the 4chan days. But back on the chans, there was a concept that was called the Skinwalker, which
Hmm.
is you can always detect somebody who is not properly immersed in that culture because there are so many layers of shibboleth there. Bringing out that term again, there's so many layers of like handshaking and irony and an obscure ceremony that somebody pretending to do it immediately comes off in an uncanny valley. And having all of those weird rituals and having all of that weird lore and having it be such a steeped community with its own language was a great way of it defending itself and a great way of weeding out people who were not genuine actors, because you can't to be that immersed, you have to be that immersed, you can't fake it. And I think
Hmm.
there are areas of the newer Distant Ride that have inherited that brilliance, really, that you have to understand the literature, and not only understand it but internalize it in many ways to be able to speak the language and carry on conversations properly. Otherwise you stick out like a sore thumb and you will never be brought into any kind of inner circle,
Nah.
which is one of the best defense mechanisms any community could ever have, is having its own culture that is very hard to ape.
Yeah, basically gatekeep everyone, and feds shouldn't be a problem.
Yes.
Basically, don't let people in because we've got enough people. We just need quality people.
Literally, fuck off, we're full.
Yeah, pretty much. Aye.
Again, that's part of why I wanted to foster the channel in the way that I've done. And I there's a I don't want to talk badly about certain people, but there's conversations I've had both in my own server and in other servers which remind me why a lot of this stuff is not appropriate for a wider audience. Because they quite simply do not have the grounding for it.
No.
Oh, excuse me. And they have the perennial 2015 brain that is such an infectious force
Mm.
in the quote unquote anti SJW community that a lot of this stuff has had to try and distance from because it is so
Just
cancerous.
I've noticed Seasider has given us a super
Yes.
chat. He's saying sexy chat and sexy stream.
Thank you, Seasider.
It's the
Indeed.
Thank you
bot
for the
super chats cursed.
it's thank you for the $10. Unfortunately, we can no longer spend that on a something awful membership for that is now dead. And Ed is a very obscure joke these days. I do sometimes feel like an internet old man.
Oh, you do, do you?
Oh,
Uh-huh.
gonna whip
Uh,
out the BBSs and do some phone freaking. Talk
I
about your
was
bot.
selling the internet back when 33,600 modems was fast. I'll have you know,
This
you and
this
your
man
broadbands.
this man remembers bod rates. Fear him.
Right. I'm putting an end to this, and I don't think we have
Okay.
anything else to show.
No.
No.
I'm going to be working on some other stuff, so there probably won't be a stream this Monday, but I have some essays I can read through and try and knock something
Yes.
together for the Monday
At some
after.
point, he's in the chat, and thank you for all your previous editing. At some point, Plasma Rob will also have worked up my speech. I'm sorry it's in such rough shape.
Is
It needed a
this
lot.
the
I
one
think
I started looking at and then told you to go write it again?
yes, it is. So that has been rewritten and is in the edit queue. Although Mr. Plasma Rob, he's a rather busy man. Although everyone do congratulate him on his relatively new job. For that is good news. And he has
Indeed.
been a great asset and friend to the Substack. So thank you for that.
I was golf
For I am
clapping.
dyslexic and cannot spell.
Yes.
But I will stop rambling and say goodbye from me.
And a very good night from him.
And a good evening probably from myself as well, I suppose.
Bye. There we go. We're off.